The Shadow Merchant. The town of Black Hollow was a quiet place, nestled between rolling hills and dense forests. It was the kind of town where everyone knew everyone and nothing ever happened, until the day the Shadow Merchant arrived. He came without warning, his presence announced only by the faint whisper of his long, dark coat as it brushed against the cobblestone streets. His face was obscured by a wide-brimmed hat, and his eyes glimmered like shards of obsidian in the dim light of the setting sun. He carried with him an air of mystery, an unspoken promise that he could offer something no one else could. The first to approach him was young Tommy, a boy of no more than 10, with a mop of unruly brown hair and a heart full of curiosity. Tommy had been playing in the square when he noticed the man standing by the old fountain, his shadow stretching long and dark across the ground. "Who are you?" Tommy asked, his voice tinged with both excitement and apprehension. The man smiled, a slow, deliberate curve of his lips that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I am a collector," he said, his voice smooth as silk. "A collector of shadows." Tommy frowned. "Shadows? Why would anyone want to collect shadows?" The man knelt down, bringing himself to Tommy's level. "Shadows are more than just darkness, boy. They are a part of you, a piece of your soul, and I am willing to pay a great price for them." Tommy's eyes widened. "What kind of price?" The man reached into his coat and pulled out a small, ornate box. He opened it to reveal a shimmering golden coin. "This," he said, holding it up to the light, "is a wish, a single wish, for anything your heart desires. All I ask in return is your shadow." Tommy hesitated. He had heard stories of wishes gone wrong, of deals with devils and tricksters. But the coin was so beautiful, and the man's voice was so convincing. "What do you say, boy?" the man asked, his eyes locking onto Tommy's. "Do we have a deal?" Tommy looked down at his shadow, stretched out before him on the ground. It was just a shadow, after all. What harm could it do to give it up? "Okay," he said, nodding. "I'll do it." The man's smile widened, and he handed Tommy the coin. "Then it is done," he said. "Your shadow is mine." As soon as the words left his lips, Tommy felt a strange sensation, as if something had been pulled from him, something he hadn't even realized was there. He looked down and saw that his shadow was gone, leaving only empty space where it had once been. The man stood, his own shadow now darker, more pronounced. "Enjoy your wish, boy," he said, before turning and walking away, his coat billowing behind him. Tommy clutched the coin tightly in his hand, his mind racing with possibilities. He could wish for anything: a new toy, a mountain of candy, even a pony. But as he stood there, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. He looked around the square, but no one seemed to notice that his shadow was missing. It was as if they couldn't see it, or perhaps they simply didn't care. Tommy shook his head, trying to push the unease aside. He had a wish to make, and he wasn't going to let anything ruin it. But as he walked home, he couldn't help but notice that the world seemed a little less bright, a little less real. And when he looked in the mirror that night, he thought he saw something or someone standing behind him, just out of sight. The fading. Tommy's wish came true the next morning. He had wished for a bicycle, a sleek, shiny red one with silver handlebars and a bell that rang like a song. It appeared in his backyard, just as he had imagined it, as if it had always been there. He ran his fingers over the smooth frame, his heart pounding with excitement. For a moment, he forgot all about the strange man and the shadow he had traded away. But as the days passed, Tommy began to notice something was wrong. Started small. A flicker in the corner of his eye, a faint sense of unease when he walked into a room. Then, one afternoon, his mother called him for dinner, and when he entered the kitchen, she didn't look up from the stove. "Tommy, set the table," she said, her voice distant. "I'm right here, Mom," Tommy replied, confused. She turned, her eyes scanning the room as if she couldn't see him. "Tommy, where are you?" "I'm here," he shouted, waving his arms. But she didn't react. It was as if he were invisible. Panic surged through him. He ran to his father, who was reading the newspaper in the living room. "Dad, Dad, can you see me?" His father glanced up, his eyes passing right through Tommy as if he weren't there. "Tommy, is that you?" he asked, his voice uncertain. Tommy stumbled back, his heart racing. He ran to the bathroom and stared at himself in the mirror. His reflection was there, but it was faint like a fading photograph. He reached out to touch the glass, but his hand trembled so badly he could barely keep it steady. "What's happening to me?" he whispered. That night, Tommy couldn't sleep. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, his mind racing. He thought about the shadow merchant, about the wish, about the coin that had seemed too good to be true. He had to find the man to get his shadow back. But how? The next morning, Tommy decided to search the town. He rode his new bicycle through the streets, his eyes scanning every corner, every alley. He asked people if they had seen the man in the dark coat, but no one remembered him. It was as if the shadow merchant had never existed. As the days turned into weeks, Tommy's condition worsened. He grew paler, more transparent, like a ghost fading into the ether. His parents stopped calling his name altogether, as if they had forgotten they ever had a son. His friends no longer invited him to play, and even his teachers didn't seem to notice when he sat in class. Desperation gnawed at him. He began to spend his nights wandering the streets, hoping to catch a glimpse of the shadow merchant. One evening, as he passed the old fountain in the square, he saw something, a faint, dark shape moving in the shadows. His heart leaped. "Wait!" he called, running toward it, but the shape vanished as quickly as it had appeared. Tommy sank to the ground, tears streaming down his face. He was running out of time. He could feel it. The world was slipping away from him, piece by piece. Then, one night, as he sat alone in his room, he heard a voice, a soft, familiar whisper. "Tommy." He turned, and there, standing in the corner, was the shadow merchant. His coat seemed to blend into the darkness, and his eyes glimmered like twin stars. "You," Tommy said, his voice trembling, "you did this to me. You took my shadow." The man smiled, that same slow, deliberate smile. "I gave you what you asked for, boy, a wish, and you accepted the price." "I didn't know," Tommy shouted. "I didn't know this would happen." The man tilted his head, his expression unreadable. "Ignorance is no excuse. A deal is a deal." Tommy clenched his fists. "Then undo it. Give me my shadow back." The man's smile widened. "Ah, but shadows are not so easily returned. Once given, they cannot be taken back." "Then why are you here?" Tommy demanded. The man stepped closer, his presence filling the room. "Because I have a proposition for you, a way to regain what you have lost." Tommy's heart pounded. "What is it?" The man leaned down, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Help me. There are others like you, others who have traded their shadows. Together, we can restore what has been taken. But you must trust me." Tommy hesitated. He didn't trust the man, not after what he had done. But what choice did he have? He was fading, disappearing from the world. If this was his only chance, he had to take it. "Okay," he said, his voice barely audible. "I'll help you." The man's smile turned triumphant. "Good. Then come with me." "This," he said, spreading his arms wide, "is the engine of eternity. It is the source of all that is, all that was, and all that will be. And it runs on shadows." Tommy's voice trembled. "You're using people's souls to power this thing?" The man's smile returned, thin and sharp. "Not their souls, boy. Their shadows. Shadows are the echoes of existence, the remnants of what could have been. They are the raw material of reality itself. And with enough of them, I can reshape the world." Tommy's mind raced. He thought of the people in Black Hollow, of the others who had traded their shadows for wishes. Were they fading too, like him? Were they trapped here, their shadows feeding this monstrous machine? "Why are you showing me this?" Tommy asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The shadow merchant turned to him, his eyes gleaming with an intensity that made Tommy's skin crawl. "Because you have a choice to make. You can fade into nothingness, forgotten by the world, or you can help me. Together, we can restore what has been taken. Not just for you, but for everyone. Tommy's heart pounded. How? The man gestured to the machine. The engine of eternity is powerful, but it is not perfect. It requires balance. Too many shadows, and the fabric of reality begins to unravel. Too few, and the world grows stagnant. I need someone to help me maintain that balance. Someone who understands the cost of losing a shadow. Tommy shook his head. I don't understand. What do you want me to do? The shadow merchant stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. I want you to become my apprentice. Together, we will collect shadows, but we will also return them. We will ensure that the world remains in harmony. And in doing so, you will regain your own shadow. Tommy's breath caught. You can give it back? The man nodded. In time. But first, you must prove yourself. You must show me that you are willing to do what is necessary. Tommy hesitated. He didn't trust the shadow merchant, not after what he had done. But what choice did he have? He was fading, disappearing from the world. If this was his only chance to save himself, to save others, he had to take it. Okay, he said, his voice barely audible. I'll do it. The shadow merchant's smile widened. Good, then let us begin. He led Tommy to a small control panel embedded in the side of the machine. It was covered in dials, levers, and buttons, all labeled with symbols Tommy didn't recognize. The man placed a hand on Tommy's shoulder, his grip firm but not unkind. Watch and learn, he said. This is where the real work begins. Over the next few days, Tommy immersed himself in the workings of the engine of eternity. The shadow merchant taught him how to read the machine's gauges, how to adjust its settings, and how to channel the shadows that flowed through it. It was overwhelming at first, but Tommy was a quick learner. He began to understand the delicate balance the man had spoken of, the intricate dance between light and shadow that kept the world intact. But as the days turned into weeks, Tommy began to notice something strange. The shadows in the machine didn't just power it. They seemed to be alive, whispering to him in voices he couldn't quite hear. At first, he thought it was his imagination, but the whispers grew louder, more insistent. They spoke of pain, of loss, of a longing to be free. One night, as Tommy worked alone in the cavern, he couldn't take it anymore. He approached the machine, his heart pounding, and placed his hand on one of the glowing orbs. The whispers surged, filling his mind with images. Faces of people he didn't recognize, places he had never been, moments that felt both familiar and foreign. Help us, the voices pleaded. Set us free. Tommy stumbled back, his breath coming in short gasps. He looked around the cavern, at the shadows swirling in the machine, and realized the truth. These weren't just shadows. They were people. Their essence, their very being, had been trapped here, used to power the engine of eternity. He thought of the shadow merchant, of his promises and his lies. The man had said he was maintaining balance, but Tommy now saw the truth. Quickly, before he returns. Tommy's heart raced as he followed their instructions. He yanked the red wire, and the machine shuddered, its hum faltering. He reached for the blue wire, but before he could pull it, a voice rang out behind him. Stop! Tommy froze. He turned to see the shadow merchant standing at the entrance of the cavern, his eyes blazing with fury. The man's coat seemed to ripple like liquid darkness, and his shadow stretched unnaturally long across the floor. What do you think you're doing? The man demanded, his voice cold and sharp. Tommy backed away, his hands still clutching the wires. I'm setting them free. Tommy felt a surge of energy, a warmth that spread through his body. He looked down and saw that his shadow had returned, dark and solid on the ground. But it wasn't just his shadow, it was more. It was alive, pulsing with the power of the freed shadows. The shadow merchant stared at him, his eyes wide with disbelief. Impossible, he whispered. You cannot control them. They will consume you. Tommy shook his head. They're not consuming me. They're helping me. He raised his hand, and the shadows obeyed, forming a swirling vortex around him. The shadow merchant took a step back, his confidence faltering. For the first time, Tommy saw fear in the man's eyes. "You don't understand," the man said, his voice trembling. "This power, it's too much for you. You'll destroy everything." Tommy took a step forward, the shadows following his every move. "Maybe, but I'd rather take that risk than let you keep controlling us." The shadow merchant's face twisted with anger. "You ungrateful brat. I gave you everything, a wish, a purpose. And this is how you repay me?" Tommy's eyes hardened. "You didn't give me anything. You took from me, from all of us. And now it's time to give it back." He thrust his hand forward, and the shadows surged, engulfing the shadow merchant in a whirlwind of darkness. The man screamed, his form dissolving into the shadows, until there was nothing left but silence. Tommy stood there, breathing heavily, the shadows still swirling around him. He could feel their power, their gratitude, but also their urgency. "We must go," they said. "The machine is unstable. It will collapse soon." Tommy nodded. "What about the others? The people who lost their shadows?" The shadows hesitated. The shadows obeyed, carrying him out of the cavern and into the town of Black Hollow. As they moved through the streets, Tommy saw the people. His parents, his friends, strangers, all fading, their forms barely visible. He reached out to them, and the shadows flowed from him, wrapping around each person and restoring their forms. One by one, they came back, their eyes wide with confusion and relief. Tommy's parents hugged him, tears streaming down their faces. His friends cheered, their laughter filling the air. But Tommy knew it wasn't over. The shadows whispered to him again. "The machine is collapsing. The balance is broken. You must restore it." Tommy nodded. He didn't know how, but he would find a way. He had to. The keeper of balance. The town of Black Hollow was alive again, its streets filled with laughter and light. People hugged their loved ones, their shadows restored, their lives given back to them. But Tommy knew the celebration was temporary. The engine of eternity was collapsing, and with it, the delicate balance of reality itself. The shadows swirled around him, their whispers urgent. "You must act quickly," they said. "The machine's destruction will tear the world apart. You must become the new keeper of balance." Tommy frowned. The keeper of balance? What does that mean? The shadows pulsed, their voices merging into one. The shadow merchant was the keeper, but he abused his power. Now it falls to you. You must control the flow of shadows, ensuring that reality remains intact. It is a heavy burden, but you are the only one who can bear it. Tommy's heart sank. He had never asked for this. He was just a boy, a fading shadow who had stumbled into something far beyond his understanding. But as he looked around at the people of Black Hollow, his parents, his friends, the strangers whose lives he had saved, he knew he couldn't walk away. "Okay," he said, his voice steady despite the fear in his chest. "Tell me what to do." The shadows guided him back to the cavern, where the engine of eternity was in its final throes. The machine groaned and shuddered, its gears grinding to a halt as cracks spread across its surface. The shadows within it were frantic, darting back and forth like trapped birds. "You must absorb them," the shadows said. "Take them into yourself. You will become the new engine, the new keeper." Tommy's eyes widened. "Absorb them? But what will that do to me?" The shadows hesitated. "It will change you. You will no longer be just a boy. You will be something more, something eternal. But you will also be bound to this duty. Forever." Tommy swallowed hard. The thought terrified him. He didn't want to lose himself, to become something other than human. But he also couldn't let the world fall apart. "Will I still be me?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The shadows pulsed softly, almost like a comforting embrace. "You will always be Tommy, but you will also be more. You will carry the weight of the world, but you will not carry it alone. We will be with you." Tommy took a deep breath and stepped forward. He placed his hands on the machine, feeling its vibrations through his palms. The shadows surged toward him, flowing into his body like a river of darkness. He gasped as the energy filled him, overwhelming and exhilarating all at once. The machine shuddered one last time and then fell silent, its gears stopping completely. The cavern was quiet, save for the faint hum of the shadows now residing within Tommy. He looked down at his hands, which glowed faintly with the same light that had once powered the machine. "It is done," the shadows said. "You are the keeper now." Tommy felt different, stronger, more aware, as if he could feel the threads of reality weaving around him. But he also felt a deep sadness, a longing for the life he had lost. He would never be just a boy again. He would never ride his red bicycle through the streets of Black Hollow, never sit at the dinner table with his parents, never play with his friends in the square. But he had saved them, and that was enough. Epilogue: The Shadow's Legacy. Years passed, and Black Hollow returned to normal. The people went about their lives, their shadows restored, their memories of the Shadow Merchant fading like a bad dream. But Tommy was never far away. He watched over the town from the shadows, ensuring that the balance was maintained. He became a legend, a whispered name in the dark, the boy who saved the shadows. Parents told their children stories about him, warning them to be careful what they wished for. Tommy rarely showed himself, but when he did, it was to help those in need. A lost child would find their way home, guided by a shadow that seemed to move on its own. A farmer's crops would flourish, even in the driest of seasons, as if the shadows themselves were nurturing the soil. But Tommy's true work was deeper, hidden from the world. He traveled far and wide, collecting shadows that had been lost or stolen, ensuring that no one else would suffer as he had. He became a guardian, a protector, a silent force that kept the world intact. One night, as he stood on a hill overlooking Black Hollow, the shadows whispered to him, "You have done well, Keeper. The balance is restored." Tommy smiled faintly. "But for how long?" The shadows pulsed softly. "Forever if you wish it, but you are not bound to this duty for eternity. One day you may pass it on, as the Shadow Merchant once did." Tommy shook his head. "No, I won't let anyone else carry this burden. Not like he did." The shadows fell silent, and Tommy turned his gaze to the stars. He was no longer just a boy, but he was still Tommy. And as long as he would keep the world safe. For the shadows, for the people, for himself.